Greetings, YouTube. I was listening to a podcast just now, and they were talking about Warhammer 40,000K. Technically, I'm still listening to it. I haven't finished the episode. And essentially, there's a guy trying to explain orcs to his girlfriend, which is quite entertaining. And I started thinking about one of the problems I've always had with the Warhammer 40,000K setting. And that it is a narrative wrapped around miniatures combat. As in, for the game to work, you have to have all these different factions and you have to have them in contention with each other. Otherwise, there's no game, because the point is that you have different armies trying to destroy each other. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. But then they wrapped a narrative around that as opposed to just making it a miniatures game. Instead of just saying these are the blue, these are the reds, these are the purples, these are the greens, go to war, they began to build a narrative around that to give them more flavor and to give them more differentiation between each other and to give people more to play with, mentally. Uh, and not to mention, to justify coming out with the new set of rules, every 4 or 5 years now, I think it is? Or has the number of rules spans for Warhammer 40,000K slowly gotten shorter and shorter over time, and eventually they'll be coming out of the new edition every single day. But it does drive up the sales on those miniatures, doesn't it? Because they have to combat the fact that the world now possesses 3D printers. But for me, that narrative is a justification for what's already happening. There's things going on, it's a miniatures game, and then you have a narrative wrapped around that. And that's always bugged me, because the universe of the Warhammer 40,000K, to me, is incredibly shallow. It doesn't have to be deep. And it doesn't have any logic to it to me. There is no storyline that doesn't involve the warfare, because the warfare is the point of the storyline. Yeah, I know the whole idea that without conflict we can't have drama. As I've mentioned on more than one occasion on my channel, I'm really tired of that. You have to come up with better reasons than you have to torment people to push the storyline that you're writing forward. I've been watching the television series Elementary, and the casting between Holmes and Watson was inspired. These two actors play against each other beautifully. They work well together, and I'm really thoroughly enjoying the series. However, I've been watching 2 to 4 episodes every single day off I have. Okay, so every weekend I'm watching 2 to 4 episodes, couple of nights, Friday and Saturday night, and I'm on vacation right now, so I'm watching 2 to 4 episodes every single day. So the storylines are really close together, and you see a lot of women imperiled. Women imperiled has gotten really old for me. Really old. I'm tired of women imperiled. Now, I understand that Sherlock Holmes is based around some real-world cases and some real-world history, and the horrible thing is that in our real world, most serial rapists and killers are men, and so they're targeting women. But I guess I don't want to see it in my fiction so much. I want something better. I want the fiction to be better, I guess, is what I'm wanting. And I want the same amount of a narrative wrapped around a miniatures game. I want there to be a story that makes sense, that has a fully fleshed background, but where there are actual people in that universe. Now you can say, well, of course there's lots of people in the universe of, Warhammer 40,000K, but because the storylines are all about the battling, you're not seeing all the people doing their people things. But the structures that exist to keep those armies running mean that, for example, a lot of those people, the non-combatants, are essentially slaves, because they have to be. All of their labor is helping to fuel the armies, who then go out there and do all the fighting, the miniatures battles. So To fuel that, you have to have a society that is dumping all of its resources into fueling its military. And as someone who's an American, I can tell you right now that having the working class live worse and worse as every decade passes so that we can continue to fuel our overbloated military that in our world is essentially doing nothing other than losing money and resources, and I mean that literally, um, is tiresome. And I guess I want more in a story. I want stories that are better. It's why I have enjoyed the Star Trek universe for a long time. But for example, Picard, oh, look at the guys that were good have become the evil people. And oh, look at in, you know, Discovery, the guys that were good just kind of gave up and now everything's crappy and they have to rebuild it all over again. Yes, conflict creates drama, which drives the story, and I'm tired of it. And I want more from miniature battles as well. For example, the actual miniature battles in the real world that we have, miniature grew out of real world history. People wanting to re-experience the the Napoleonic battles or the battles of a particular you know era in the past, whether it was the classical era with the Romans or with the Greeks in the Roman era, or it was the battles between different the Scots and the English, or the English and the French. Every era has its conflicts, but they were creating those games based on an existing history, often a very shallow history because they weren't looking at the full depth of what was going on in the world at large, and the fact that lots of those battles didn't have to take place except for the fact that the leaders who were absorbing all of the resources of the working. There's a theme in here now, isn't there? So, but at least those miniature battles had a really solid foundation that they were building upon, the real world. So maybe I'm asking too much. Maybe I'm wanting a fantasy setting to have that much depth to justify the existence of these miniature battles, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or what have you, or in the case of Warhammer 40,000K, a mix of all kinds of different things being, happening simultaneously. Maybe I'm asking too much. That's very well could be true. It's one of the reasons I have a difficulty with so many science fiction things that take place in the future, and they only reference our era. The best example I can think of is Orville. Almost all of the references made by the crew of Orville are references to our 20th and 21st century timeline, which means that the viewer, you and I, can really, we can relate to that. We fully grok that. However, it doesn't make much sense because that's what in the Orville universe is it 500 years? So that would be the equivalent of, us making constant references to like the 16th and the 17th century. How many of us on a daily basis make references to the 16th and the 17th century? I might, but I'm a weirdo and a bit of a history buff. But your average person doesn't. They can't relate to the 16th and 17th century. They cannot. They can probably not even tell you what the dates were in the 16th and the 17th century due to the strange way our calendar is structured, and the numerical value on a century is not actually the number of. It's always been very confusing to many people. Because we didn't start with year 0, we started with year 1. I want them to do better. But if you have the Orville universe and the show has them doing nothing but making references to the things that took place in their youth or the youth of their parents, that's going to be referencing things that haven't happened, that are completely fictional because they'd be taking 300, 400 years in the future. There would be no context for us. But that's where it can be interesting. Fifth element. one of the greatest science fiction stories ever done. Is it a perfect movie? No. But the depth of that film is it's one of its greatest features. And none of it is explained in the front. There is no, you know, people throwing exposition at you in that. It's all done by revelation. It is showing, not telling, just like Fury Road. It is showing, not telling. And that, to me, is the fun of both of those movies. It's showing, not telling. I have to pay attention. I have to make these connections in my head as I go. But if I do that, I have a very rich experience. Wanting that out of a game or a television series could be asking a lot, because you'd be asking writers to not only create fictional stories taking place in the time frame that they've decided the story takes place in, but you're asking them to go into the past and fill in all that backstory to the same degree of depth that our real world history has. That's a big ask. I know this. But if Luc Besson can do it when it came to Fifth Element, and Valeria Valerian is to a lesser extent, because that film wasn't quite as well done, though I hear he has an incredibly large amount of backstory. I want him to put that into print someday. I think it's doable. It's just going to be a task for someone that has a level of dedication like Luc Besson does. And not many have that. Not many game designers are willing to do that because they just want to create a board game, which is essentially what a miniatures battle is. It's a very elaborate board game. And in the case of the stuff coming out of Games Workshop, an ever expanding one because they want to keep those sales up. So I guess I'll always be disappointed with backstories that don't make a lot of sense to me because they are trying to justify the existence of a board game. And wanting there to be better is, I guess, it's acceptable, and wanting something isn't necessarily bad. But expecting someone else to deliver may be asking a bit much. And you could be saying, well, why don't you do it? Well, I actually don't have any desire to build a board game. And I can tell you right now that whenever, people have interfaced with any of my ideas when it came to world building, that what they experience is that deep to what I actually have in my head. You're only going to ever see this much of the surface, but I've got backstory that goes this deep. In some cases, because of my ADHD and autism, I have been working on some of these ideas for literally 40 frigging years. And I've been building characters and creating concepts that I know will never see the light of day, but they're as real to me as the history of the world around me. I don't confuse them, but they're just as complex. And I'm sure if you ask any writer out there, they've got the same thing. What they show the world is nothing compared to what they've been living with for as long or longer than they've been writing. Oh wait, well, I guess I've been blathering on enough for this video. I guess I'm on vacation this week. I'm on holiday, so maybe I've been prone to pondering a bit deeper than I normally do. I'm also feeling a bit under the weather, so maybe it's a bit of a fever dream. Expecting other people to have enough depth of story that I can then interface with, as opposed to just trying to justify things deep enough to justify the existence of a board game. But yeah, I guess I want that. I will admit I'm not willing to put the work into doing it, and maybe expecting other people to do it is asking a bit much, but there are people that will, and the backgrounds of Fifth Element and Fury Road are examples of how a person can build a world and have it feel real, even if it is not something we have ever experienced, nor will we ever experience, makes everything just so much more engaging.